One of Charles Dickens' most famous stories is one that has come to represent the archetypal orphan protagonist, Oliver Twist. Although not without its controversies, Oliver Twist provides a peek into the seedier side of London life, and brought to light the differences in class in England at the time. The book is of course about a young orphan named Oliver, with the scene of him asking for more food becoming a highly recognized image of English literature and is probably what most people think of when they hear the term Dickensian. Dickens, who actually worked in a factory as a child, was very familiar with workhouse conditions and used the story to show how terrible they were. With Oliver, he immediately created a sympathetic protagonist that the reader would feel bad for. After his plea for more food causes shock, Oliver is sold to an undertaker, and after a confrontation with one of his employees, runs away to London with hope for a better life. Arriving in the city, Oliver comes across a wide assortment of colorful characters, including the pickpocket, Artful Dodger, the villainous Bill Sikes, and the kindly Nancy. Dickens actually got flack at the time for writing Nancy in a sympathetic light, but with her character he wanted to show that not everyone with a criminal background was as bad as people assume. One of the more unfortunate aspects of the book comes from the depiction of Fagin. Even though Dickens sought to give his characters dimension, Fagin is written with almost every anti-Semitic stereotype imaginable. This is made even worse by the book's illustrations, and him being referred to as the Jew more than his actual name. This is not even something that became controversial years later. He was criticized for this when the book was first being released in serialized form in 1837, and when he later sold his house to a Jewish couple, they expressed how upset they were at how Fagin was written. Throughout the book, Oliver appears to find happiness, only to have it taken away from him. For example, he finds himself under the care of a kind gentleman named Mr. Brownlow, only to be kidnapped by Nancy and Bill Sikes. Then he's shot at during a botched robbery and is brought back to health by another nice household and cared for by a young woman named Rose Maylie. This is taken away from him again. However, through it all, Oliver retains his pureness as he avoids taking part in the criminal actions of the thieves. What's surprising when reading Oliver Twist is that Dickens almost seems to lose interest in Oliver at a certain point. There are long portions where he does not appear, as Dickens focuses his attention on Nancy, Fagin, Sikes, and others. The number of wild coincidences involved with Oliver's family history also pile up to a surprising degree. By the end of the book, it seems like half of London is related to him. Nonetheless, Oliver Twist remains a solid snapshot of how the poor citizens of England lived in the early 1800s. Like many Dickens stories, it's provided inspiration for a number of adaptations, which took different approaches to the material. Fresh off his success in Charlie Chaplin's The Kid, Jackie Coogan appeared in a silent film version in 1922. The movie condenses the entire story down to 74 minutes, and while not a bad adaptation, I did find it to be somewhat dull. Coogan's involvement leads to a few slapstick comedy scenes, and it's actually one of the few adaptations I've seen that includes the Maylie family, but otherwise comes across as a Cliff Notes version of Dickens' book. David Lean directed an adaptation in 1948, and this is definitely one of the better versions out there. What stands out about this movie is the atmosphere, while many of the actors do a commendable job of playing the characters. A young Anthony Newley plays the Artful Dodger, and Robert Newton, who many will recognize from his roles along John Silver in Disney's Treasure Island, is Bill Sikes. Lean actually kept a lot of the humor from the book, especially with the character Mr. Bumble, and is able to mix that well with the darker elements of the story. Unfortunately, Alec Guinness plays Fagin a little too similar to how it's depicted in the book, with the makeup also taking direct inspiration from the original illustrations. Because of this, the movie actually took 3 years to get an American release, and only after several scenes were removed. Despite Guinness's performance, Lean's adaptation remains one of the definitive Oliver Twists. I personally think the best adaptation belongs to the stage musical Oliver, created by Lionel Bart. He did an excellent job of translating the story to the theatrical medium, while also adding a wonderful selection of original songs. The tunes are catchy and lyrically clever, and my favorites are probably Consider Yourself, Food Glorious Food, Reviewing the Situation, As Long as He Needs Me, and You've Got to Pick a Pocket or Two. One of the best things the musical did was alter Fagin. Bart, who was Jewish, and actor Ron Moody, who was also Jewish, removed the anti-Semitic stereotypes from the character and made him much more sympathetic. In the book, he doesn't care that much about the young pickpockets under his care and is even responsible for Sikes killing Nancy. For the musical, Fagin was changed to actually see the pickpockets as family and is quite protective of Nancy and Oliver. The role of the Artful Dodger would especially prove to be a popular one among young British actors, including Davy Jones, later of the Monkees, and Phil Collins. I actually did see Oliver on stage many years ago in a production directed by Sam Mendes, and I instantly became a fan, listening to the cast recording many times. A film adaptation of Oliver was released in 1968, and was just as good as the stage version. As directed by Carol Reed, the result is one of my favorite movie musicals, with plenty of brilliantly choreographed song numbers and great performances from the cast. Ron Moody reprised his role as Fagin from the original production, while Jack Wilde played the Artful Dodger. Mark Lester was cast as Oliver Twist, although that was not his singing voice. Instead, the film's orchestrator, Johnny Green, brought in his daughter to dub over Lester for the songs. Shani Wallis captures the sympathetic nature of Nancy and really sells her performance of the song As Long as He Needs Me, and Oliver Reed presents easily the most terrifying portrayal of Bill Sikes I've seen on screen. The production team did an excellent job of transforming Shepperton Studios into Dickensian England, with sets like Fagin's hideout and Nancy's pub standing out. And despite the many cheery musical numbers, Reed still retained the sad and dark elements of the book. Oliver went on to win the Academy Award for Best Picture, and I personally think it's one of the more underrated Oscar winners. In 1988, Disney released a very loose animated adaptation with talking animals titled Oliver and Company. In this version, Oliver is a kitten, Dodger is a dog, voiced by Billy Joel, and Sykes is a loan shark, who Fagin owes money to. It was interesting revisiting this movie after reading the book and seeing what was kept, which admittedly was not a lot. The basic structure was somewhat there, with Oliver getting involved with a group of pickpockets, then finding himself in a nice house, after which he's kidnapped and brought back to Fagin. There's a chase after Sykes, who has a brutal death scene in the end. The 80s New York City setting is also a fitting time and place to set a modern-day version of Oliver Twist, as the city was notorious for its crime during that decade. However, director George Scribner and the writers and story artists did not feel too beholden to the source material. It's clear the filmmakers were mostly intent on doing a funny, talking animal movie with Dickens' story used primarily as a jumping-off point. This would not be the last time a Disney production would adapt Oliver Twist, as a version made for The Wonderful World of Disney aired on ABC in 1997. I sadly found this adaptation to be very underwhelming, with several unusual decisions. The movie rushes through many of the plot points the filmmakers attempted to fit the story into the 7 to 9 p.m. time slot. They even have Rose Maylie living with Mr. Brownlow, and Oliver finding out about his potential family heritage very quickly. One interesting deviation is portraying Oliver as more street-smart here and showing a genuine enthusiasm for pickpocketing. The biggest names in this version are Elijah Wood as Dodger and Richard Dreyfuss as Fagin. To be honest, I thought Dreyfuss was completely miscast. They actually bury him under a bunch of makeup, and he picked an odd voice for the character that distracted more than anything. They also sanded off a lot of the darker edges of the story and featured the most ordinary-looking Bill Sikes I've ever seen. In the end, I found myself mostly bored with this one. Roman Polansky directed his own take on Oliver Twist in 2005, and it's a fairly faithful adaptation. Well, almost. For the first half, it looked to be following the book very closely. However, at a certain point, Polansky and screenwriter Ronald Harwood decided to depart from the source material in significant ways. I did not mind these deviations too much, although I did find the second half of the movie suffered a bit from pacing problems. Something that stands out about this version is the depiction of London, with Polansky emphasizing how dirty and grimy the streets were at the time. Ben Kingsley plays Fagin, and he's able to find that balance and make him goofy but not too much, while also avoiding the stereotypical traits of the character. I think the best performance in the film belongs to Leanne Rowe as Nancy, as she depicts the various emotions going through her head and her difficulty with dealing with Bill Sikes. Oliver Twist is admittedly only the second Charles Dickens story I've read, after A Christmas Carol, but nonetheless showed his skill as a writer to make you feel sympathy for his characters and using the setting to enhance the tale. While there are some unfortunate elements in the book, there's a reason why so many have sought to adapt it to various mediums in their own unique way, and why that image of Oliver Twist holding up a bowl and saying, "Please sir, I want some more," will continue to be passed on to each generation. See you next time.